And with the holiday season upon us, we thought some customers would appreciate hearing directly from Peter Baker about his very well done work assessing the Obama presidency. And judging from the turnout this afternoon, we were right. Peter, of course, covers the White House for the New York Times. The White House is one of the toughest, most demanding beats in journalism. But Trump isn't the first president that Peter has reported on. He's his fourth. Peter also has covered the presidencies of Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, and Barack Obama. He did take time out from the White House beat about a decade and a half ago to spend 4 years with his wife, Susan Glasser, as co-bureau chiefs in Moscow. He also did some stints covering the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. But he seems to keep coming back to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. I first got to know Peter when we were colleagues at the Washington Post, where Peter worked for 20 years before switching to the Times in 2008. I might forgive him. I've always admired his work, especially his analytical pieces, which are not only terrifically insightful, but very well written. And beyond that, he's just a really nice guy. He's written 3 previous books, one about the impeachment and trial of Bill Clinton, another about Bush and Cheney in the White House, and a third with his wife Susan about the early years of Vladimir Putin's rule of Russia. His new book, Obama, The Call of History, with its large size and many beautiful full-color photos, appears at first like something meant for the coffee table, and it would really make a nice addition to everybody's coffee table. But it's also a serious history, as detailed and authoritative as Peter's earlier works, just better looking. Michael Eric Dyson, writing in the Washington Post, called Peter's book a, quote, compelling and concise survey of Obama's 8 years, and another reviewer on Goodreads said, "This is a book to keep and flip through after reading." So, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Peter Baker.
Appreciate it. Hi, guys. How's everybody doing today? Yeah? I feel like some people I recognize here from previous stops. So thank you guys for coming out, especially on the middle of a weekday afternoon. It's a great treat for me to be here, especially with Brad and Lissa, who I think have done an extraordinary job of preserving and enriching and expanding this pillar of our community. As a Washington native, I can't tell you how much Politics and Prose means to us, right, who live here and have always lived here, and really cherish its place in our community, especially at this time of season when we're all, of course, looking for good books to buy for our loved ones. Which is a very shameless way to pitch into this one here. I know, but it's true. It did come out in July, in June, and I didn't quite understand why they did that. It was kind of a funny time for a book to come out. But I think there was an appetite for interesting things to say and look at about Obama, President Obama. Obviously, he's now been out of office for almost a year, and yet he's still, I think, a figure who really intrigues us, captivates us, mystifies us, excites us, angers us, depends on our point of view. And we thought we would get a book out that tried to capture a little about that in a hybrid way. It's mainly a picture book, but there is a text in there as well, and the text is meant to kind of capture those 8 years in a down the middle journalistic New York Times, Washington Post style of history that tells a story without taking sides, but kind of gets you inside the room a little bit. And people said, well, why did you want to write about Barack Obama when you've got Donald Trump to write about? That's a good question. But I think Obama remains, even as captivated as we are by the extraordinary spectacle of the Trump presidency, I think Barack Obama remains a very intriguing figure in our national consciousness. And it's because we don't really quite know what to make of him yet. Even now that he's been president for 8 years, even though he's been on our national stage for a considerable amount of time, we're still sort of puzzling through who Barack Obama really is and who he was. And that only makes sense if you think about it, because his arrival on the national stage was all about this idea of self-discovery. His book that he wrote, Dreams for My Father, was a exploration of his own identity, of his own roots, and his own place in our national identity. And I think that's a theme that continued throughout his political career. We found ourselves constantly looking to decide who Barack Obama was and what he represented. Think about when he took office. He came to Washington on the same route for his inauguration that Lincoln had taken. He had announced his candidacy on the steps of the old state capitol in Springfield, Illinois, as Lincoln did. He put together a cabinet that included Hillary Clinton and others, remember his own team of rivals. He put his hand on the same Bible as Abraham Lincoln had put his on. And yet he wasn't the only president we compared him to, either in that moment or the years to come. Remember, the New Yorker, I think, had him on the cover as George Washington with a you know, what's the word I'm looking for? The wig, yes, thank you. Time magazine had him as kind of a latter-day FDR with the cigarette holder and the pince-nez glasses, and some people sort of compared him to John F. Kennedy at the time, sort of a young, attractive African-American Camelot for the modern age, cool and hip and new generation. As things got more difficult, and when his presidency went on, we compared him to Lyndon Johnson at times, right? He's sending more troops to Afghanistan. Is this another Vietnam? Are we getting ourselves further into a quagmire? Some people compared him to Dwight Eisenhower or Ronald Reagan. When things went bad, his critics compared him to Richard Nixon. People on the left who didn't like his drone strikes or his keeping of some of Bush's surveillance policies compared him to George W. Bush. People who thought he didn't do enough on Syria or other, international quagmires compared him to Jimmy Carter. It got to the point where one of his aides told me once, he said, I think the only president we haven't been compared to is Franklin Pierce, which is good because Pierce is a drunk, so that's good. No, it's true, actually. That's one of my favorite presidential quotes of all time. Franklin Pierce served one term as president, not a great president for obvious reasons, left the White House, and his famous quote was, "What is there to do after the White House but drink?" Now, actually, Obama's not much of a drinker, so I don't think we're seeing that. But as he himself noted, we were looking for ways to fit him into a lens that we understood, right? As he put it himself, he did not look like all the presidents on the dollar bills. We wanted to make him something that we understood because we didn't know who he was, and we wanted to put him in a box. We wanted to kind of fit him into a category that made sense to us. And yet he managed to sort of captivate and confuse us at the same time. At various points in his presidency, he was criticized by the right, he was criticized by the left. I think that owes to his own sort of his rise to power. Remember when he ran for office in 2008, he promised to be sort of two different things at the same time. He promised to be sort of this new champion of a new generation liberalism or progressivism that would show that government could be a force for good in society. And he also talked about being a bridge builder, somebody who would reach across party lines and put aside the old partisanship. Remember, it wasn't going to be a red America and a blue America. It was going to be the United States of America. And fundamentally, of course, these two concepts are at odds, right? Either you're an ideological champion pushing a great program, or you're somebody who's going to be making compromises all the time. And it's really hard to do both those at the same time. And invariably, people saw in him what they wanted to see. He himself said, I'm like a Rorschach test, which I think is a good way of putting it. We saw in him what we wanted to believe. And for those of us who covered him at the White House, he was kind of opaque as well. I mean, he didn't open up a lot, let's say. He didn't let his guard down. When he came back on the Air Force One to talk with the press in the back, he didn't kind of chit-chat. He didn't throw his arm around you and say, how are the kids doing? He didn't, he wasn't a hail fellow, well-met kind of guy. It just wasn't his nature. Unlike, say, Joe Biden, right, or Bill Clinton, who were and are those kind of politicians, right? Those guys are very tactile, feel your pain type of people. That's not Barack Obama. In fact, somebody told me a story, a colleague of mine told me a story once about Joe Biden. My colleague was a scared flyer, and he was on Air Force Two, and he was nervous, and he was on a bumpy ride, and his knuckles were turning white, and he had his eyes closed, and suddenly he realized that somebody was holding his hand, and he looked up to see it was Joe Biden. And Joe Biden says, "It's okay, buddy. It's all right. We're going to get through it. Don't worry. We're going to get through it." That's who Joe Biden is and was, right? That's not Barack Obama. It's just not his nature. It's just not the way he operated. My colleague Maureen Dowd famously compared him to to Mr. Spock, right? He was kind of the, restrained, logical Vulcan. But people forget that Spock was actually also half human. He was half Vulcan and half human. And I think, like that, Obama has a human side that we sometimes miss. He's a very interesting guy in a lot of ways. He's a fierce, trash-talking competitor on the basketball courts. If you talk to his aides who played with him there, or even ambassadors or senators or so forth, he would give as good as he get. He'd elbow you in the face and trash-talk you and say, how come? You got to pick it up, man. You got to do better than that. He was not restrained when it came to his competitive streak. He had a range of interests in his music. He had a list on Spotify that would challenge anybody's conception of what modern music is. And he stayed up late watching Sports Center and went home to be with his family at 6:30 for dinner every night. He really genuinely doted on his daughters. I remember we went in plenty of motorcades to his school on Saturdays to, he would watch the basketball games or what have you, all 30 cars and an ambulance and a war wagon and about 14 of us press people sitting in the van outside. But he was going to do it no matter what. And I think maybe the most emotional moment of his presidency, we all watched him, we reporters, and I think the country watched him react to the shootings at Newtown, Connecticut, as any of us might have reacted, in which he was so struck, so powerfully emotional, crying literally in the briefing room as we waited for him to compose himself. So there was this human side to him, I think, that people miss. And I think this book hopefully captures a little bit about it with the images that you'll see in there. One of my favorite images is the picture, you all probably remember it, of a little African-American boy who asks, does your hair feel like my hair, right? And Obama leans down, way down, tall guy, and the little boy's feeling his hair. And it's just this amazing moment. And I love that photograph because it says so much about him, and it says so much about his moment in our history in which, things really had changed. That doesn't mean they haven't changed for good or the things are going to always be the same way, but this was an extraordinary moment in our time. He governed through such difficult moments. We all remember, of course, not just the financial crash that he inherited, but to wars, a continuing terrorist threat, one thing after another. Got so bad that he and his first chief of staff, Rahm Emanuel, used to joke. He said they're going to finally just throw it all away and they're going to move to Hawaii and open a T-shirt sack. And they're tired of tough choices. There are just too many tough choices. President Obama said the same thing I heard every other president I've ever covered say, is all the tough choices are the ones that make it to the Oval Office, right? The 90-10 choices never make it to a president. They get all the 51-49 choices, right? Never easy. Any president. Bush said that. Clinton said that. Obama said that. And so he and Rahm Emanuel would joke that they were just going to have one type of T-shirt, one color, white, one size, medium. No tough choices there. And so when they would be in the Situation Room and some awful, horrific challenge would come up and they were forced to make a difficult choice, Emanuel would kind of look over at the president and say, white. And the president would look back and say, medium. And these are incredibly difficult times, and he was governing through such a polarized moment, which unfortunately has not changed since his departure, but it continues to plague our politics today, in which literally the entire 8 years he was president, no poll ever showed a majority of Americans saying that they felt the country was on the right track. Even when he was doing well, even when they were approving of what he was doing, even when he succeeded with his policies, the country has been in a divisive mood going back now for more than 15 years. And that's a tough time. That's a tough thing for any president to govern in. He talked about this in his last State of the Union, that his real regret was not being able to fulfill his promise of bringing people together, right? Again, coming back to that red America, blue America concept. And the high-flying rhetoric that he had come to office, the inspiration that he had brought to a stadium full of 80,000 people and a national audience, even Republicans who didn't support him, I think when he was elected at least, were affected by the moment. All of this then becomes, mired down in the actual nitty-gritty and the ugliness of politics. You campaign in poetry, Mario Cuomo said, and you govern in prose, and the prose is never as pretty as the poetry. So by the end, the president who told us that when he was elected, it would be the beginning, then the rise of oceans would begin to slow and the planet would begin to heal, had kind of pulled back on the expectations that he had for his own ability to accomplish things. He told David Remnick, the great writer and editor of The New Yorker, he says he's learned that being president means you're essentially a relay swimmer in a river full of rapids, and that river is history. And he said, at the end of the day, we, meaning presidents, we are part of a long-running story, and we're just trying to get our paragraph right. So this is this paragraph, at least one of the first paragraphs to be written about him, and I hope you find it of value, and I'd love to see if we can open this up and have a conversation, take some questions, and it doesn't have to just be about Obama. We can talk about anything that might interest you. But let's do questions rather than speeches. You want to start us out?
Mr. Baker, thank you very much for being here. I'm very much enjoying reading the book. My question is, one of the things that I have found particularly interesting about the Obama story is about how Senator Ted Kennedy and Caroline Kennedy famously endorsed then Senator Obama for president during the 2008 primaries. One thing that I'm wondering is, what impact do you think the Kennedys' endorsement of Obama had on Obama being nominated and on his subsequent rise?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's still a sore point for people who were in the Hillary Clinton camp. I don't know anybody who might be in that camp, but it was a sore point. I think it was a big moment because for two reasons. One, it gave the imprimatur of the Democratic establishment to say it's okay to be for this guy, right? You don't know who he is. He's only been senator for a couple years. Yes, Hillary Clinton has been around forever. The Clintons are a big part of our party, but it's okay to be for this new guy. And second part of that was this unspoken torch passing of the glamorous Kennedy family to a new generation of inspirational kind of leader. I mean, Kennedy inspired with his oratorical skills, and that was Obama's great gift as a campaigner. Didn't necessarily always translate into the ability to govern. That's a different thing. And I think he discovered how tough it is to translate good speeches into good policy. But in that moment, I think it was a big moment because it began to, it was a permission structure in effect for a lot of Democrats to say, yeah, okay, we can go with this guy. And I think it affected him too in terms of his commitment to healthcare reform. Healthcare reform was important to his campaign, but it wasn't the be-all and end-all. And it became the be-all and end-all of his first year in office. And I think partly because of his sense of loyalty to Kennedy, who at that time was himself, on the suffering from a brain tumor that would ultimately claim his life. And I think he wanted to fulfill this, bedrock ideal of the Democratic Party that had gone back a century without being realized. So I think it was a big moment. Yes, over here.
Yeah, I'm a great fan of President Obama. I was a little disappointed that during his presidency, as far as I could tell, he didn't do much to build up and promote the Democratic Party. Could you comment on that and maybe the reasons why?
Yeah, it's a good question. That's one of the things we've seen just in the last few months, right? What Donna Brazil's book brings out is how poor the Democratic Committee was in the 2015-2016 time period, to the point where Hillary Clinton's campaign needed to bail it out. That became controversial because of the fundraising contract that she writes about in her book. But the reason it was in that shape was because the president was not much of a party builder. It just wasn't his priority. It wasn't his interest. He, remember, created his own organization, Organized for America, OFA. There was sort of an almost competing structure, took away some of the fundraising from the party. And there are a lot of Democrats who are disappointed that, as successful as he was in those 8 years politically, the party lost hundreds and hundreds of seats across the country in state legislatures, not to mention Congress and the governorships. So he was not able to translate his own personal popularity to the party in general. And people can argue whether he actually spent a lot of time trying, and there's a consequence to that. You might also make the argument, did he do enough to groom a successor, or simply accept Hillary Clinton as the next logical, obvious candidate? And there's going to be a big debate about that, I think, going on for years. He chose to go with Hillary Clinton, who had been very loyal to him, who really, I think, made a point of being a team player in his cabinet. But you can make the argument that generationally, would it have made sense to have brought along a next generation of Democrats? And I think right now we're seeing that there's a real void at the top of the Democratic Party.
Hi, thanks. Wanted to ask you about the next 10 years for Barack Obama.
Yeah.
And if you have some sort of forecast to make, that would be good. But the thing that I'd really like you to do, though, is to focus on what you think he should do over the next 5 or 10 years. You have the benefit of a lot of experience in the White House and what other presidents have done, from painting to solving world problems.
Yeah,
so,
that's right. George W. Bush, the painter.
What do you think would be a great thing for Barack Obama to do over the next 10 years? One or more things, national or international. Very ambitious, or not try to be too ambitious. To be realistic, what could be accomplished?
That's a great question. And I think, and it's not for me to give advice or guidance to a president. So I don't mean to duck your question entirely. I do hope the first thing he does is really make sure this book he's writing, his memoir, is as honest as he can make it. We know he's a good writer, right? Anybody who read his first book understands that he is maybe the best writer we've had in the White House in generations, just in terms of sheer ability to write. I hope he takes that and gives us as honest and forthright and candid and introspective a memoir as we know he's capable of giving us. That's a hard thing to ask a president to do, because in the end, these books are often, again, some people here know better than I do, but these books are often political statements for history as much as they are a personal reckoning. Right. But I would love to see him give us as honest a book as he did when he was, Harvard Law Review president, because I would just really be interested in knowing what he thought and how he experienced the presidency and how he views the country that he inherited and the one he left behind. Having said that, he's a politician, so he probably won't. But each president has to find his or her, I say her because we're going to get to a her, his or her own way after the office. He's a very young person. He's not done. I don't think he harbors wishes to go back into the political life. He's shown he just as soon not do that. But he has a place that no other former president has, which is, and he's shown that through his My Brother's Keeper initiative, which is meant to encourage young African American and Latino men, boys, as they grow up. He has, it took him a while in office to feel more comfortable talking about issues of race, where he obviously has a voice that no other former president could have. How much he chooses to weigh in on those things once he's done with his memoir and it becomes more public again is a good question. I think he'll take the best of what he sees from Bill Clinton's, philanthropic and charitable activities, and I think he'll take from George W. Bush's too. Bush does more charitable and public policy things down in Texas than people realize, not as, as high profile as the Clintons have. I don't know that he'll take up painting. I was reading something today. In fact, George W. Bush, when he first met with his painting tutor, says, there's a Rembrandt trapped in this body, and it's your job to liberate him. But it would be interesting to see if Obama would branch out and try something that we hadn't thought of. He has great credibility around the world. Right. He left office on a higher note than he actually governed him. And he spent a lot of time in the 40s, right? His approval ratings were not always great when he was president. He left in closer to 60. And he has an opportunity, if he chooses to use it, to be a voice on issues he cares about. So far, he's tried to stay out of the public arena because I don't think he wants to make himself a target for Trump. I don't think he wants the debate to be Trump versus Obama, because he knows that Trump loves an enemy. President Trump, he does best politically when he has somebody else to go after, and Obama doesn't want to be that person. He doesn't want to be a distraction, in effect, from the issues that he sees that are important. But his legacy, you ask what's going to be his legacy 10 years from now, we don't really know, because a lot of things he tried to accomplish are under assault right now by his successor. Now, every new president comes in and does things different than his or her predecessor, but this is the first one I think we've seen in a long time who spent as much concerted effort to specifically undo programs left behind by his predecessor. And we just don't know where that's going to end up. On healthcare, he hasn't succeeded yet. He might. On a lot of other things like trade and climate change, the Paris Pact, and so forth, he has switched directions in the country. and undone some of the things that President Obama did. But what I think President Obama's people would tell you is there are some things he did that simply can't be undone, right? Nobody's ever going to be able to take away from him that he led the country out of the fiscal crisis that he found himself in. Nobody will ever take away from the fact that he ordered the raid that killed Osama bin Laden. Nobody will ever take away from the fact that he was the first African-American president in a country that has struggled with race for centuries. So, and I think in a lot of other ways, his legacy will still be part of our firmament, even if his successors don't choose to, enact or keep the same programs. But we tend to look at our presidents more fondly as time passes. We tend to, passions tend to fade, and we tend to remember the better parts. George H.W. Bush, who left office with only 38% of the vote in 1992, today is the best regarded of the post-war presidents, according to most polls. So we tend to rethink our presidents as time goes on and put their accomplishments and failures in a different context. So, yeah.
So I think a lot of us felt that the election of the first African-American president said something about the country. So what did it say, and how do we understand that some of the same people that voted for him voted for Trump? I can't get my mind around that.
I know, right? Isn't
Yeah.
it interesting? 9%, that's the number. 9% of Americans who voted for Obama voted for Trump, right? And even aside from issues of race, that just seems like such an opposite conclusion. But I think the thinking might be, I don't want to speak for people I haven't interviewed, but I think the thinking is we want somebody from the outside, outside the system, somebody who is going to break up the current system. Obama was the outsider compared to John McCain and Hillary Clinton, right? Longtime pillars of the establishment. Donald Trump couldn't be more of an outsider in the sense that he is outside of the political system. Now, he's an insider in the sense that he's a very rich guy and obviously has done very well through the establishment over the life of his business career. But in terms of the political system, he was out there planning, promising to break China. And so that's, you have to imagine the 9% is somewhere in that mindset. But yeah, he ran a campaign that was, overtly, playing to racial issues like the birther conspiracy theory. He seems to be the exact opposite of what President Obama was. And what David Axelrod says, he was, of course, President Obama's strategist. He says, look, the country normally, this is not unusual in the sense that the country looks for a remedy, not a replica. When we're done with one president, we look for somebody who is the opposite of the one we're just leaving behind, because we've kind of grown a little tired of that one. And we're looking for whatever it is that we think is the cure to the one we've grown tired of. And certainly Obama was very different than President Bush, right? But it's a very, I think that's one of the, President Obama said last year, he says, if you elect Trump, I will take it as a personal insult.
So much for that.
And I think I think he does to this day take it as a personal insult. And I think he and his people, his advisors are still to this day, and Hillary Clinton's advisors, trying to suss through how did that happen and what are the reasons why, and what does it say about our country. And we can talk about Russia, we can talk about Jim Comey, we can talk about all these different things. We talk about the New York Times, but whatever those factors might have played, this still doesn't explain why a country that chose Barack Obama would then choose to go with Donald Trump. It's not a straight line. History zigs and it zags, and I think that we zigged 10 years ago, and now we're zagging.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Despite presidential legacy rethinking, do you think that Obama's Syria will be seen by history as Clinton's Rwanda?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's certainly, I think even President Obama's advisors would tell you that is a black mark, a dark chapter of his presidency, that the failure to be able to find a way to resolve that crisis, whatever your position on what they should have done is, will linger as a chapter he has to explain away to history, because it does not. This is hard to find a lot of good in there. Now, it's a reaction in part to what he inherited, and we're always fighting the last war. So he did not want to do Iraq all over again, and he looked at Syria and he says, "I don't want to do what George W. Bush did." But the problem is that it becomes a binary choice, right? Either and the way he always presented it was, either you're going in with 200,000 troops, the 82nd Airborne, and so forth, and getting into another quagmire, or you're essentially standing on the sidelines saying, well, they got to fight it out. And it felt like he never committed to anything in the middle, because he was looking at the downside of everything. And that's a healthy thing, but it can also paralyze you, right? If you ask about every problem, well, yes, you could do that, but what if this happens? And I think he did that a lot. And understandably so, he wanted to say, what are the downsides if we tried this, that, or the other thing? And ultimately, deciding not to do any of those things is a decision to do something, right? Is a decision not to be a part of it. And I think his reversal on the missile strike to retaliate for the chemical weapons use hurt his credibility and hurt the country's credibility in the Middle East. Maybe it shouldn't have. I get his argument. His argument is, well, we got a better result by teaming up with the Russians to try to remove those chemical weapons from Syria than we would have having a simple feel-good missile strike against an empty building. Fair enough. But the truth is, like, it was brought up again and again and again by foreign leaders and interlocutors as an example of American irresolve. And whether it's fair or not, that became the knock. And so I think Syria is one of the areas that I want to see what he says about that in his memoir and how he tries to explain it. You remember, of course, Bill Clinton apologized to Rwanda. He says, I should have done more. I wish I had done more. And it haunted him. And Obama's a smart guy. I'm sure he thinks in his mind that he wishes he could have done different things. Hey.
So you talked about the division between Obama, the sort of bipartisan healer, and Obama, the progressive. If he had jettisoned the bipartisan unifier stuff early, and he had really pushed a progressive agenda when he was more popular and the wind was at his back, how do you think things would be different? Could he have gotten single payer through? Could he have gotten more robust stimulus? Or did he really push the envelope about as far as he could have given the congressional realities?
That's a great question, and one that we will debate for a long time. I think that, the truth is, I think that at a certain point, political pragmatism becomes a self-fulfilling reality, right? I can't get more than this, therefore I won't try. But having said that, I'm not sure that he could have convinced Democrats to go along with single payer or, a $1.7 trillion stimulus, or whatever number would have been better off. I think that the mistake on the stimulus was that they thought they could come back later, and they couldn't. Once they did it, that was it. That was their one shot at it. And they thought, well, it's okay. We're not getting as much as we thought we should get, but we'll be able to have more bites at the apple. And they didn't. On the healthcare thing, it's just the politics of the Democratic Party itself were fractured on how to go on that. That was complicated enough. We see today with Trump, it's one party rule is hard, actually. If you're only governing with one party, then two senators, in Trump's case, can stop you from doing what you want to do. And it was basically the same with the Democrats in the 2009 to 2010 range. Today does not look that different in some ways than that period in terms of the way the president was governing. I think Obama tried more than Trump has tried to reach out to Republicans, certainly. But in the end, he was governing with the majorities he had. And navigating the politics of his own party proved to be challenging enough. But he had a pretty extraordinary 2 years of legislative accomplishments, then followed by 6 years of not. But those 2 years, arguably, he did as much as any president legislatively since LBJ. I think he thought he would have more time. So,
Thank you.
So on a lighter note, that dazzling smile, incredible sense of humor, some of the best White House correspondence dinners in all time. So apart from the white and the medium, I'm just wondering how you've observed him over the years. He seems to have the ability to laugh at himself, which I think is a pretty essential characteristic for a president. How might you have observed him using this humor to get through some of the terrible things that were thrown at he and his family, and also some of these really tough decisions that he had to make? How did his sense of humor either save him or make things happen?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And there's a whole, the book is set up different than a lot of books. There are little mini chapters on different things like that. And there's one on President Obama and humor. So
Good.
I encourage you to read it.
I will.
And one on President Obama and his use of social media and the unconventional means of getting across a message, like the Two Ferns program and
the
some of
anger
these,
management.
the anger management, and some of these YouTube stars, the woman who was in a bathtub and green lipstick or whatever. And he was, he did have a sense of humor. I thought of somebody who watched him a lot. He was not naturally funny, in the sense that he didn't make a spontaneous joke that really worked. He was because he was so cautious in everything he said, he would step on his own punchline. But if you gave him good material, he had great timing. He had perfect comic timing. At these White House Correspondents' dinners, he would go through these jokes, and he was very, very good, very funny. What I actually always enjoyed as a reporter there was he would kind of he would read the joke, and he would kind of chuckle himself. That's pretty good. he would enjoy it himself.
Yes.
I like that one. And he had very good timing. Of course, one of the best jokes was, everybody keeps telling me I need to have a drink with Mitch McConnell. Why don't you have a drink with Mitch McConnell, right? He was very good at that. And of course, now we might argue that he went a little far when he started ribbing Donald Trump, right? Because in the 2011 Correspondents Association, Trump didn't take it so well. Some people think maybe he ran for president as revenge for that, but he was pretty funny then too. He did use humor, and he had a good sense of humor. He was a relaxed person in a lot of ways. He had a temper. We didn't see it a lot in public, but it was not a volcanic temper the way, say, Bill Clinton had. He wasn't a wag or a rogue in the way that Bush was. Bush liked giving funny nicknames, and he was, he always liked to make fun of his mom or whatever. Bush actually was really good at self-deprecating jokes. That's where Obama wasn't really good. His self-deprecating jokes were usually about somebody else, right? So when he did the self-deprecating jokes about being a Muslim or being born out of the country, he was really making fun of the other guy. But he did it well. And, one year he showed up with he says, I've got a film of my birth, and he showed, Lion King, and the anger management was hysterical, obviously. Where you remember this, he had the fella from, I'm forgetting the show, Luther.
Pool.
Right.
Yeah.
And he said what the president was really thinking when the president said, I'm glad to be here with you press people. And we got the other answer. So one of the funniest moments, of course, comes in that same year he made fun of Trump, is they are writing the script for the next night, for the White House Correspondents' dinner night. And one of the jokes is to make fun of Tim Pawlenty. Now, nobody today remembers who Tim Pawlenty was, but at the time, people thought he was going to be a big deal and running for president as a Republican. And the joke was something like, too bad about Tim Pawlenty, too bad about that middle name of him, Osama. And it was supposed to be funny. And he said, let's not do that. I don't think that's very funny. Let's try something else like Hosni, because Hosni Mubarak was in the news in that time. And his aides are like, why are we doing that? That's not funny. Hosni's not funny. That's why I want to do it. And they only understood 24 hours later when the president came out in the East Room and announced he had just killed Osama bin Laden. And he did not want to make the joke about Osama bin Laden the night before at the White House Correspondents' Dinner. So, but yeah, I think he had some good joke writers, and he was really good at delivering them. The drop joke? Oh, he made fun of he said, look, everybody knows Donald Trump has these great tough decisions to make. On Celebrity Apprentice the other night, Gary Busey, he didn't do very well on the steak, the cooking of the steaks. And Donald Trump, he made a decision right there and then, said, you're fired, Gary Busey. He says, I have to say, that's the kind of thing that would keep me up at night. And of course, what was keeping him up that night was literally the raid to go after bin Laden. So it's even funnier in a sense, or ironic in a sense, when you learn afterwards. Yeah. But even at the time, people laughed at it. So.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was wondering what others think in hindsight, what would have been different if Rahm Emanuel had not been chief of staff? Would the first 2 years have been more effective, less effective?
Well, it's interesting. President Obama, of course, had come in promising to be an outsider. He wasn't going to be just one of those, the same old Clinton Democrats. But then he realized, or decided that he needed a pillar of the Clinton Democratic establishment to be his chief of staff. So picking Rahm Emanuel from the very beginning was a very interesting and in some ways controversial choice, because it said to a lot of people who had sweated bullets to get him elected. Why do we do that if we're going to simply have Rahm Emanuel, who would have been Hillary Clinton's chief of staff too, be in there? But I think he decided he wanted a wartime consigliere. He had an economy that was on the brink of the abyss. He wanted to get health care done. He wanted to do climate change. He wanted to do immigration. He wanted to do Dodd-Frank, or what would become Dodd-Frank. And he decided that it's all well and good to be the outsider, but if you can't actually get anything done, there wasn't much point in it. And it was a really interesting calculation on his part, right? It's very pragmatic. It did anger to me a lot of his own idealistic supporters who thought they were getting past that generation of Democrat. Rahm Emanuel didn't make himself a lot of friends at times and didn't try to at times. But I think it was a very pragmatic decision on Obama's part. But it didn't necessarily, they didn't always see eye to eye. You know, when it came down to health care, and Scott Brown won the special election in Massachusetts, and they suddenly no longer had the supermajority that would allow them to push through a health care plan in the Senate without a filibuster. Rahm Emanuel is the one who said, let's pull back. Let's go more, less ambitious. Let's have a skinny bill, he called it, in which we just do children's health care, and we do a little of this here, and we'll come back and do some more later, which is pretty much what Bill Clinton did, basically, after the health care didn't work in 1994. And Obama was the one who said, no, we're going to keep pushing. We're going to push, and we're going to get through the big plan that we're going for until they literally can't get through. And it worked. I mean, you could say it wasn't, you know, the best plan in the world. People have its criticisms of it. But it was Obama, not Rahm Emanuel, who decided to push to get the more ambitious version of that legislation through. And it wouldn't have happened without him. So.
Do you think, in hindsight, I think Obama's a loyal guy, but do you think he regrets that decision at all?
Regrets having Rahm Emanuel as his? I don't think so. I think he viewed Rahm as being the person for that moment. You know, and it didn't necessarily mean he wanted him for the entire time. Or there are other moments when Rahm wasn't necessarily the right person. But I think I've not heard him say or heard people say that he has expressed regret about that.
Thank you.
Hi. Big fan of yours,
Thank you.
Mr. Baker. I was more compelled to come up here based on some of the comments that were made. And, okay.
Yay!
Actually, I just two questions. Second question is, what compelled you to write the books? Because there's Tombs books out here on Barack, and still not enough.
Yeah.
Okay, but I like to get why you wrote it. But the first question is, how much did Obama consider race making big decisions? Because the comments that were made in the room earlier, just like, if you were black and you're the first black president, you're a front runner, a pioneer to the rest of us.
Yep.
And you don't want hanging over your head, did I do something to prevent the next African American? Did I make it hard?
Yes.
And I mean, Syria is a great example.
Yeah.
Okay, you would have to be a fool to go into Syria because it's a lose-lose. I don't care for polls or we don't know what the outcome of that would have been.
Yeah. Right.
Okay.
Yep.
And so you rolling the dice on Trayvon Martin. They wanted him to come out and say something about Trayvon. Who knew he was going to say, if I had a son?
Yeah.
Okay, which was another way of saying what?
Right.
I'm not going to try to figure that out. So I don't look at Obama purely through the prism of race when he makes decisions, but I heavily consider the consequences of that approach.
Sure.
Okay.
Well, and I think it's under. So what is his legacy? He knows and knew when he was elected that the first line in history is going to be the first African American president, right? It was inevitable. That was going to be the first line, no matter what he did. But he didn't want that to be the only thing that was in that paragraph. He wanted that paragraph to be bigger and more expansive than that. So, particularly in the first term, I think he wanted very much to be seen as a president who happened to be African American, not an African American president, right? And he was very wary of being pigeonholed and being put into a box. And so he didn't talk about race very much, right? He shied away from it. Now, as a political calculation, he had a re-election to worry about. So he gets past re-election, and then he does get more comfortable talking about it. Now, again, that's also a function of the events that were happening in the country at that time, right? we had not just Trayvon Martin, which happened right before the re-election, but we had obviously Ferguson and Baltimore and Charlotte and all of these the Dallas and all these terrible moments that required any president, much less the first African American president, to step up and tell us how we should be thinking about these things and how we should get through this moment of division and hate.
But when you wrote the book,
Yeah,
he was going to get flack from the blacks.
yeah.
If he did this, he was going to get flack from the whites.
Sure. No, he got a lot of flack from a lot of African Americans who didn't think he did enough
Right.
to be, for African Americans as the first African American president. And his argument would be, if I make the country better, it's better for all of us. And my programs like health care disproportionately help people who are disenfranchised. And so while it's not aimed as a program toward African Americans, a lot of people who would benefit from it happen to be African Americans. So he tried to frame it in that way.
Exactly.
He really did not want to be seen entirely through that prism. But he grew more comfortable with it over time, and I wonder what his post-presidency will be like in that regard, because again, his voice is different than any other president's. And it's if nothing else, I think you're right about the desire to be cautious and not make a mistake, right? Because he knew that it wasn't just another president making a mistake; it was the first African American president making a mistake that would reverberate through time and make it harder for any others. It would confirm to the bigots that they were, see. And look what he did. 8 years, if nothing else, he had 8 years of pretty much scandal-free, at least in terms of himself and his own actions, scandal-free presidency. We can argue about things like Benghazi or whatever, the IRS, but those are not about him personally. And he had a family that was seen as wholesome and, healthy and lovely and loving. And our judgments of him as a president are the judgments we hopefully would make about any president. Did he do Syria right? Did he do Syria wrong? Should he have gone for single payer on health care? Should he have handled this or that differently? And therefore, I think that one of his biggest accomplishments is simply being president for 8 years and not being about that. My son, who's 12 years old, he didn't know anybody else other than Barack Obama as president, right? And he doesn't think it's a big deal that an African American was president because that's all he knew. And Valerie Jarrett, President Obama's great friend, says that's not a small thing to think about. That the children who grew up under Barack Obama grew up with the idea that there is no ceiling for African Americans in this country. That's not a small thing. That doesn't mean that we solved our issues. I think who said this earlier, we over-interpreted what his election meant, right? It didn't suddenly expurgate our racial issues in this country. It didn't. We still obviously have them in unfortunate depth. And I think that was one of the things really frustrating for President Obama, that he would be, of all people, president when we had these terrible police shootings and these terrible, riots and these terrible events that were pulling us apart. But I think he paved the way for the next African American president, whoever that will be at some point down the road. So.
And why'd you write the book?
And why did I write the book? Partly because of that. I think he's just a fascinating figure in our history. He will always be unique in our history because of his rise out of almost nowhere to become such an inspiring figure, to then become mired in the nitty-gritty and the sloppiness of governing that is much more challenging than hope is one thing, change is another, right? And I think the struggle to turn hope into change is just inherently fascinating. So, thank you. Thank you. Okay.
Hi. Yes. Days of Fire was really good.
Thank you.
So, I have a general question about journalism and the news media. I feel like we're at a crossroads right now, given the fact that what happened in the 2016 election, and now we have a president that just, if he disagrees with something, he's just going to call it fake news.
Yeah.
Another thing too is the news media outlets out there, like Breitbart and Fox News, are spewing all this basically fake news and their really slighted opinions that a lot of Americans are believing, and that's the only news source that they're looking at. On top of that, too, reading silly memes that shows up on their Facebook wall.
Yeah.
And they're just spewing that back and forth on social media and just watching Fox News. So my question is, where do you see the news media in 5 or 10 years? And Is there a possibility or a way to not necessarily police yourselves in the media, but how do we get back to not to use Fox News, a fair and balanced approach?
Right. Yeah. No, I think it's a great question, and it's a really interesting moment in our media's history because, in fact, we have sort of fragmented now, right? When you and I grew up, when we grew up, we had 3 networks and 2 or 3 papers, and those were basically the sources for everybody, right or left. And we might all then take those same fact sets and then argue about what they meant, but we started with the same fact set. And today we're not starting with the same fact set, left or right. If we like, if we care about, climate change, we might just want to read Huffington Post, and we don't want to, if we care about immigration because we think it's bad, we're going to read Daily Caller or whatever. We're all separating to our corners, and living with people who agree with us, both physically and metaphorically. And so it's a challenge. It's a challenge for papers like the Post and the New York Times to try to still be, outside of that ideological division, because we don't want to be enemies of the people, and we don't want to be Trump's opposition. We're not. When he says we're the opposition, it's not our job to be opposition. It's our job to be independent media. It's different things. He wants us to be his opposition because, first of all, the Democrats are kind of weak, and we're an easy target. And it's healthy to his base. They love it. Yes, media sucks. We can't play into that. That should not be what we do. We should do our jobs, as I see it, as professionally as we can, and that includes holding him to account, as we would hold any president to account if they did the same things, and it includes being fair to him as well, and not knee-jerk one way or the other. I worry that a lot of people have come to the New York Times in the last year because they see our reporting, which has been, I think, pretty aggressive, and we've broken a lot of stories, as we should. And I don't want, my worry is that Trump and some of his biggest opponents see us in the same way, right? Which is that we're supposed to be the voice of the resistance. It's not us. I mean, the editorial page can do that, that's fine. But the news page, which is what I'm part of, should be straight, down the middle, fair. That doesn't mean he said, she said, everybody gets an equal voice, but it does mean that we're trying not to put our foot on the scale. And I think that that's the real calling for us in the next 10 years, because the brand is going to matter. If people eventually start realizing, and I'm not getting my full information, where can I go to explain what this means to me, whether there really is, some pedophilia ring next door at Comet Pizza, where can I go to get information I can trust? We have to be that source. And do we have to police ourselves? Yes. And I think it's important than ever. We have really expanded our staff here in Washington in the last year. Among people we have hired are 2 fact checkers. One who full-time fact checks the president, and one who full-time fact checks us. Because we cannot afford to make mistakes at this particular moment, because we will feed into that distrust. We will feed into that desire to diminish our credibility. And we have to be, better than Caesar's wife, making sure we're as professional as we can be. We don't always do it. When we fail to do it, we ought to correct it. We have a pretty robust corrections policy, but we ought to be as aware as we can be about our failings, and be as open as we can be with our readers about them.
Do you feel like it's going to balance out eventually?
I do. I'm an optimist. I really do. I think, the failing New York Times, by the way, is doing great. The failing New York Times is doing great. So our readership is up 400,000 paid subscribers this year alone. Our stock price is up 50%. Our bureau, which was around 70 full-time people a year ago, is now at 107. So, we're doing okay. But what I hope is we can translate that burst of interest, which I think is tied to interest in Trump, into a more sustained, lasting commitment to the kind of journalism we produce. So, thank you very much for the question. Appreciate it. Thank you, guys. It's a lot of fun. Really appreciate it. Thank you.